for those of you who are coming back, welcome for the first time for some of you to what has been a semester-long series here at the North Star Church for the Arts that conceptually is celebrating the history of Black comedy in the United States. For those of you who've been here for previous events, Marsha Warfield, the comedian, was here a few weeks ago. On the 24th of October, we will welcome actress and comedian Kim Coles. And though it's not public yet, on November the 14th, we will welcome actor and comedian David Allen Greer in this space. But today, we are joined by Bassey Ikpi. And let me just start by telling you a few things that some of her friends, her fans, say about her writing. The writing in I'm Telling the Truth, but I'm Lying is wholly sincere and consistently slanted. This is so hard to pull off. No writer in the country does as much with short, soulful sentences as Bassey Ikpi. We will not think or talk about mental health or normalcy the same after reading this momentous art object moonlighting as a colossal collection of essays. That is from Kiese Layman, the author of the award-winning Heavy. Because Bassey Ikpi's writing is a revelation, a thrill, devastating and uproarious, lively in its accurate depiction of the lack of boundaries between the terrible and the hilarious. I'm Telling the Truth is a feat and will soon become the favorite book of many. It is already one of mine, and that would be from Tarana Burke, the founder of the Me Too movement. I first came in contact with Bassey on Twitter. Literally when I first showed up on Twitter in 2010. And I'm trying to figure out who I was reading these uproarious tweets from that were so humorous. And I started on Twitter the same time that we launched Left of Black back in the fall of 2010. And you were one of the first people outside of my comfort zone
I didn't know that.
that I invited onto the show. You were on episode number 10.
I did not know that.
And what is now like 300 episodes was you and Jelani Cobb.
Yes.
On that particular episode.
Yeah.
And I think I remember in the introduction, I described you as a humorist.
Yeah.
And part of the reason why I thought it was important to have Bassey here in the context of this class, first of all, when we think about Black humor, we always think about the tradition of stand-up comics. And that's part of it, but that's just a part of it. We have a rich tradition, obviously, of comedic actors, but also authors who are writing through comedy, and very often through pain and trauma, using comedy, the funny, as a way to reach folks. And I found myself, when reading your collection of essays, caught between having that kind of real feeling in my throat, that element of concern that you bring to readers who suddenly have that concern for you, and then laughing my ass out loud.
What part?
Often in the same sentences. And part of it is a kind of self-deprecating humor. Your ability to always see the funny, even if you're not trying to be funny, in these kind of dark moments. And I know, from interviews that I've heard with you, stuff that I've read, just my own interactions with you, you never think of yourself as funny in that way.
I don't. I think that I think that there are times when I jokingly say I'm hilarious. But I don't think that I write funny. Often people will ask me, to write something that is purely comedic. I did an interview last week when I was in New York, and the interviewer said that when they heard I was writing a book, they just assumed that it would be a humor book. And I don't know where people get that from, because I've never been what I consider a funny writer. I think that writing comedy is a very specific skill set, and it's not one. And you know, from Twitter, there are people who think they're hilarious on Twitter, and those are the ones that usually get in trouble because their humor is very forced and it lacks the nuance that I think that really good comedy has. I've been a fan of comedy my entire life. I watched all the stand-up, religiously, and because I'm such a fan of comedy, I know the work that goes into it.
You don't consider yourself a comic. You don't consider yourself doing comedy. What about that element of your work that's just about honesty and being so much of an open book, initially on places like Twitter, but even in your spoken word career, and obviously in this book, where do you find the fortitude to be so honest about everything that you've been going through?
Well, I think that, and I'm going to answer that question and then go back and hit the comedy part again. I think it comes from a space of wanting to be understood. I think that so much of what happens, especially when you're talking about mental health, happens here as far as how it's processed. So I never knew how it was coming across to other people. It's very easy to use words like depression and anxiety and things like that without having the proper context. What does this really mean outside of this word, outside of the common vernacular? People now will say, oh, the weather is so bipolar, and so that's common vernacular. But what does that actually mean? And I wanted people to understand what was going on in my body, what was going on in the space that I occupy. I wanted them to have a really clear picture as opposed to the assumptions that are very easy to make. But going back to comedy, the cliche of "you laugh to keep from crying" is something that I've held on to. That time, 2010, was the last time I was hospitalized, and depending on when exactly, I was either just out of the hospital or on my way to the hospital. And during that entire time, I'm cracking jokes, I'm doing all these different things to remind myself that I was still a living being, as opposed to the shell of a person that I felt. Comedy, laughter. In my household, I have a very funny family. My mom doesn't know that she's funny, but she is. But my father is very intentional about his joking and his comedy, and my entire family sort of uses, much like many black families, uses comedy and joking and laughter as a way to ease some of the tension that exists in the house.
The first source of some of the humor in your book is growing up Nigerian in the United States. And where'd you grow up again?
Stillwater, Oklahoma.
Okay, let's process that for a second. Right? I mean, because it's one thing to be like Nigerian in New York, or Nigerian even in Boston, hell, even Nigerian in Durham.
Yep.
It's a whole nother thing being Nigerian in Oklahoma.
Yeah.
What was that like?
I mean, for the longest time, it was all I knew. But one of the things that I like to say is that if there is a college or university there, you will find a Nigerian, no matter where on earth it is. If there is a school and they're handing out scholarships, there is one there. And that is very true of my family. My father bounced around the very deep South. He went to, I think he was in Tifton, Georgia. He was in Knoxville. He was in all these very, very, very southern places. And he knew, as a black man in America, that that's not where he wanted to be. He didn't want to be in Tifton, Georgia. But he didn't know anything else about America. So for him, Oklahoma was New York. as far as he was concerned, that was the big city, Stillwater. So he went to Stillwater. My mother and I were still in Nigeria. We came to join him. It was difficult going, because I've had these different transitions. It was difficult going from an all-black world to one where I was, one of very few. And then not only that, because it was a college town, there were people who came and went. But our family kind of stayed, even after my father graduated. My mom went to Langston University, which is at HBCU. So my relationship with Blackness was was determined by my father also learning about Blackness, American Blackness. So when I had questions about certain things, he was also answering those questions and learning those or asking those questions himself. So I was raised on Malcolm Speaks. He used to play. He had this. Y'all are probably 12 and a half, but he had this 8-track of Malcolm Speaks, and he had this huge console, and he used to play it. Like, I remember our weekends was just Malcolm's voice.
I didn't know they recorded Malcolm X like on 8 tracks.
Well, I mean, somebody put it on an 8-track, unless my dad was bootlegging back in the day. He might have been. My dad did a lot. So it was a weird experience because I had a very keen sense of my Blackness, but I was surrounded by people who didn't care about it. And then when we moved from Stillwater, Oklahoma, when I was 13 to Maryland, right outside of DC, my relationship with Blackness changed again because I went from being one of a few to one of many, and the way that I chose to be Black was different than the ways that people who had lived. I had to repurpose my Blackness.
Talk
when we
about
moved.
that for a little bit.
Well, I'm very clear about the fact that though I am Black American and I'm very proud of my Blackness, I will never presume that the Blackness that I have is the same as those who are born and raised and come from people who were born and raised on this soil. I don't have a right to that. I'm very clear about that. My father made me very clear about that because I had a very brief moment, when I came home from school after being teased and bullied, and I was like, I hate them. And my dad was like, you hate who? Who do you hate? You hate you? Because these are your people, and these are the things that they've gone through that you'll never understand. And my father was very, very clear about that. But it also showed me that the ways in which that we determine our Blackness is based on so much more than the music we listen to, the hairstyles, all these different things. And I had to learn that very quickly. And I've always had like a deep and profound respect for that, so that I try as best as I can not to overspeak,
Did you write as a kid?
Yeah, I read since I was, I wrote. I always say 8 years old. I don't know what it is about 8 that holds all my memories, but I've been writing my entire life, and again, it was always to be understood. Yeah. There are things that were happening in my life, in my head, in my family, at school that I needed to process, and I found, because I learned to speak English, read English, and write English within like the same year. Okay. I was able to see just how important it was to be very clear about how I communicate. Being able to read this language that was new to me and see how someone who didn't know anything about me, because they probably died 200 years before I was born, they were able to say things that spoke to me. And that was magic to me. It was absolutely magical. And I wanted to be understood. I wanted someone else to read what I was writing and understand things that I was trying to process. And I wanted to process them myself. When I'm able to write, in order for me to write things out, I'm working through them. And so by the end of it, I figured something out, which is, a large part of how this book was written.
Did you share a lot of that writing when you were younger?
I didn't. I had notebooks. Actually, I wrote in journals and notebooks, and then I would throw them away because I didn't want my mom to find them. Yes, there's a whole treasure trove of my brilliance at 8 years old out there.
Do you ever sit around and think you wish you had held on?
I don't, because I held on to my college journals, and those were embarrassing, to the point where I tried to read them about 12, 13 years ago, because I was going to write a book, and I had all the facts there. And I was so embarrassed by the things that I was writing that I edited them. I erased things. I actually typed out pages of new memories, better ones, and then I glued them to the journal over the real stuff. This is a look into my psyche. This is why I'm on medication. Like, I didn't want those memories to exist, so I corrected them, I fixed them, and I put them in a box.
You describe yourself, I've seen a bunch of interviews and reviews in which the headline is ex-poet.
Yeah.
Why do you call yourself an ex-poet? And talk a little bit about how you came to prominence really in this kind of deaf poetry moment, doing spoken word stuff.
It was one of the as a bipolar person, I had a lot of very reckless, spontaneous bursts of energy. I didn't think things through. That's basically what I'm trying to say. I did not think things through. I was in class one day at University of Maryland, Baltimore County, and something happened in the class, and I walked out of the class, went home, called a friend, and asked if she wanted to go to New York for the weekend, and I stayed for 7 years. Didn't think it through. But I also, during that time, joined the poetry scene in New York. There were people who were doing it in ways that I didn't know were possible. I started performing poetry when I was in college because I was walking through the quad and I saw a sign for jazz and poetry at the pub. And that was the first time I'd ever seen anyone standing up and performing their poetry. I'd never heard of that. I just wrote them and put them in these little books. I didn't know that people were saying them out loud. The thing, though, was that I memorized all of the things that I wrote because they were a soothing technique for me. I would repeat them as I was showering. When my anxiety was up, I would just go over and over and over in my head. So I had all these poems memorized. I just did it for myself. So seeing people do that for the first time in college was a life-changing experience. And then when I went to New York, and I saw that people did it on this large scale, it really fulfilled this need I had to tell people about what I was going through without actually having to say those words. So when I say ex-poet, poetry to me was where I hid. I was able to couch everything that I felt, everything that I was going through in these metaphors and these similes and these beautiful, I'm calling myself beautiful, whatevs, but this beautiful, ways and imagery and all that stuff just to avoid the raw, honest truth. So when I say ex-poet, it's because I've made a commitment to myself as a writer to be more intentional in the truth-telling. And poetry doesn't leave room for that. Of course, poetry and prose are cousins. So a lot of what I write, it has a poetic language to it. But where in poetry I would just leave that poetic language and then move on, with prose and with this book, I would say it and then I would have to extend it. I'd have to carry that metaphor and I'd have to carry that metaphor into a reality.
As a reader, the times that I felt most anxious reading your book, and anxious for you, is when you talked about the challenges of being on the road, trying to remember where you need to be on this date after being gone for 2 or 3 weeks. Yeah. And your struggles with sleep particularly resonated with me, trying to come home, trying to get to sleep, knowing that you have a 6 o'clock flight or a 7 o'clock flight that's going to take you away for another 2 weeks. Yeah. How are you sleeping these days?
I sleep well. For the first time, well, let me just say, for those who've read the book, and people always ask me, I am 100% the healthiest I've ever been in my entire life right now. I wouldn't be able to do any of this if I wasn't. I wouldn't be able to write the book had I not been in a better place than where the book would place me. And for the first time in over 15 years, I don't have to take a sleep aid to sleep. I'll take, melatonin every once in a while. If there's an anxiety issue, I'll take, an anti-anxiety, a Xanax, at night, just at night to to make me drowsy enough to fall asleep. But for the first time in my entire life, sleep is not as much of an issue. And when it is, because last month when the book just came out, I was doing a lot of work, my sleep routine and my sleep schedule was disrupted. And I know now immediately to call my therapist, immediately to say, this is what's going on. What do I do? How do I handle this? As opposed to in those pages where I would just let it keep going and going and going.
How long you've been in therapy?
I have been in therapy this go around for 4 years, but off and on for 14, 15.
When you were younger, because that's, when we talk about therapy in Black communities, there's a shame that's associated with people who need quote unquote therapy, who choose to go to therapy. I could imagine that as a Nigerian American, right, that also resonates in a very palpable way. Yeah. How much of that shame that's associated with what we think of as therapy was connected to your decisions to either seek therapy or not?
I never felt enough shame not to do it when I needed it. My mother has a psychology degree, which is ironic in many ways, but she used to get Psychology Today sent to the house, and I used to read Psychology Today as a elementary school kid, just read it page to page, and I was terrified a lot of it because there was so much that I could recognize in myself at that young age, but I didn't want it. But I also became very familiar with the conversation around therapy and the conversation around psychology. I wish that I had someone that I could speak to about it, so that I could have gotten into therapy much earlier. But by the time it became part of a conversation that I needed to have with myself, I just went and did it. The first time I went to see a psychologist, I was in college. I went to see, I'll never forget, her name was Bernadette, and I hated it because all she did was sit there and write. She didn't talk, she didn't ask me anything. I felt like she was taking notes to show people, at brunch or whatever was happening at that time. And I didn't go back again until I wrote in the book. I think I tried. I went in the want ads. I looked for a psychologist once or twice when I lived in New York. And listen, yeah, it's a miracle that I am not dead. I have done the dumbest. It's a church, so I can't really curse, right?
No, you can't.
I've done the dumbest shit, and I am alive. I have not been, I found in Craigslist, I found a psychologist, and I'm in somebody's house, talking to them, and it's so stupid, but here I am. Babies and fools.
There are moments in the book where you talk about being on medication and talk to a doctor, first of all, the experimentation with medication, those moments where you talk about living with the fog, and then those minor moments of clarity. There's a really funny passage where you talk about the fog and the clarity, like exchanging notes and you're on watch now. And there's having to remind one of them, it's like, no, you've been up here. Right. But when the doctor says to you for the rest of your life, and how that kind of brought a moment of clarity, it's like that moment in the Sam Jackson, John Travolta movie,
Pulp Fiction.
Pulp Fiction, and Sam Jackson's talking about, I was sitting there eating my muffin and I had a moment of clarity. That's what it feels like, when you finally come to terms with the fact that this is not something, like you kept saying, I thought I could just take an antibiotic. Yeah. And after 2 or 3 weeks or a month, it would be over. Yeah. But it's a lifetime thing. How has it been managing?
It's gotten easier over the years. I'm still very resentful of it. Yeah. I'm still very annoyed at the fact that in order for me to have a semblance of normality, I have to do this every day. In 2016, I had one of the worst depressive episodes of my entire life, I was done. I was pretty much sure that I was not going to make it out of this one, and I had made a decision to start preparing my friends and family for that possibility, for that reality at the time. And one of the things that I did, because I just gotten into therapy a year before, I wasn't really taking the medication the way that I should have. And I had to not only start taking it more regularly, but I had to double dosages. I had to increase certain things, change things, because I told my family, I will try the way that you want me to try, but I'm only trying to show you that this is not going to work. Medication is this, at this point, it's like being upset that I'm short. You know, it's just something that I'm gonna have to do. I wear heels and I take pills. That's just, those are my options here. There's nothing else I can do with my life or with myself. It's not something I love, and there's a danger to me and a lot of people who live with specifically bipolar disorder. When you start feeling better, you start thinking, oh, I can skip today, and I can skip tomorrow, and the next you know, it's been 2 or 3 weeks. So I have to be very, very, very careful, even now, after years and years of this cycle. I still have to be very careful not to get overly confident when I'm feeling well.
What was the moment that you decided that you needed to put your life in a book?
The moment when I thought my life was ending, 2016. I thought my goal was, I've always wanted to write a book. People have always told me I should write a book. So I thought that the book would be the perfect swan song. Like, I write a book, I'd have revenue for my child and for my family, hoping it did well, and that would be it. That would be the story, you know. The difference became, and my best friend, who I've known since the 8th grade, reminded me of this when the book hit the bestsellers list. You can applaud. Thank you. It's a big deal. She reminded me of it because she was so emotional, and she said to me, I was so scared because you told me I'm going to write this book and then I'm going to be done. And she watched me forget that I said that. So every time there's a milestone, every time I'm turning in a draft, she's happy that there's a book happening, but then afraid that I'm going to remember this thing that I said to her. And I completely forgot that I said it. I forgot that was the plan. So the journey to this book has been one of extreme apology. I have been apologizing a lot to people because of this book. When I'm able to go and, because I'm able to look at all these things that I've gone through and feeling that all these things have been very internal and they weren't bothering anyone and nobody was affected by the things because they were all happening here and here. And then to see, as someone watching myself go through this and really feeling for the first time what that must look like to the people in my life. What that must feel like for them. How I'm reading my own book or writing this book and wanting to go back 10 years and tell myself to take a nap. And how is that for people who were in my life at that time? So it gave me this real sense of empathy and compassion for the people in my life, in a way, if that makes sense.
I know that you're self-deprecating enough publicly that I know that a lot of this comes from very sincere humility. But how do you feel about the book and being a New York Times bestseller and, you know, being on NPR and all the stuff that comes with, you know, having a successful book?
Was that an applause? You can. Thank you. It's surreal. I've spent so much of my life feeling like an unfulfilled promise. I felt so much especially, again, going back, being one of the first in our village who was born in Nigeria or born in Ugep and then raised in the States. I was an experiment that failed. There was so much that I was supposed to do. One of my favorite professors, Dr. Ackland Lynch, who was amazing, he inadvertently said something to me about a decade ago when I ran into him. He was like, wow, you were supposed to take over the world. You were supposed to change the world. And he said that in a way that it reminded me that I hadn't, that there were so many expectations put on me that I didn't fulfill. And for the first time, in as long as I can remember, I am purely proud of myself. I am content. I'm pleased. It's been a lot, and I'm grateful that it's happening now and not in 2010. Because I think that had it happened in 2010 or had it happened in 2014, I would not have been prepared to handle it because of how much I was still working through.
But you are changing the world. I mean, between you and Jay-Z and 444, like, folks are like, oh, therapy is like an option.
Yes, me and Jay-Z. Together.
That's the public conversation we need to have, right? You and Jay-Z talking about the benefits.
Tell Jay-Z to call me. I would like to have that conversation with him. I've always sung the praises of therapy. I think everybody should be in therapy. I think therapy should be part of the conversation when we have our annual physicals. We need annual mentals and monthly, actually. It's never, no, let me not say never, because then someone will be like, oh, my therapist tried to kill me. It's usually better than not to see someone who has an objective lens on your life. I've benefited so much from being able to have someone who sees my life completely different than I do, and her only goal, her only job, the only reason why she's there is to help me with that. Yeah. And that is priceless. That's priceless, and I wish that it was more readily available to people.
I can only assume that you have a great agent, literary agent.
I do not.
She's not great, or he's not great, or?
No, to be honest, the agent that sold this book, or the book that was supposed to be this book, I had to fire him.
Okay.
But I have a new agent who's fantastic, but I'm not ready to write book 2 yet, right. So he's just kind of there.
But I'm sure
sent me flowers, though.
I'm sure this new agent is thinking about, wow, we should figure out if, like, Hulu or Netflix might be interested in optioning this. So in the event, when that happens, who's playing Bassey?
I'm playing Bassey. Shit. Are you serious? I'm playing me. God damn it. This is what I wanted in 1999. I am not going to let this pass me by. I'm going to be Issa Rae for, like, the 40-year-olds. But you know what? I'm going to announce it here. Or did I already announce it? Whatever. Pretend I didn't, and you're hearing it first. I signed to United Talent Agency, and we're turning the book into a series.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
So you had to answer to that before I asked it.
Absolutely. I was waiting for you to ask me. I've been wanting to tell people. I tried to tell this flight attendant. She didn't care.
So are you playing yourself in the series?
No. I mean, I would love to. I would love to because... I mean, come on. I would love to. No, I don't know. I have this idea for the series, and I've had it for a really long time. And the idea that I have would make it so that there would be a 40-year-old, a 20-year-old, and a child.
So who plays the 20-year-old Bassey?
You know what? I want an unknown.
Okay.
I want somebody who is still either auditioning or just graduated from a theater department, someone who works IT and has always wanted to act. I want those people. I want an unknown to play 20-year-old Bassey. Why is that funny? Like, I don't understand. What is that funny?
No, the IT part.
Oh, because people who like they want to do the arts or they want to be in the arts or in communications or something, but they go the practical route.
Right, they're taking out livers and.
Right. I have a friend who's a doctor who should be an actress, and she's not. I mean, maybe she shouldn't be. Being a doctor is great.
She's like doing knee replacement.
Right. Like, I don't want to like disparage doctors. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you want to be in the arts, I want you to be in the arts. So I'm going to find an unknown.
You were, and I don't know if you accept this description, but you were like one of the first stars of Black Twitter. Before like it was a thing.
Okay.
And there's a moment late in the book where you talked about needing to be present in the world and like wondering if people were wondering where you were, if there hadn't been a status update, for 3 hours.
Yeah.
What was the pressure of being present in that way, right? Because it's not just your experience, right? I mean, virtually everybody who's on social media regularly, that's their experience, right?
Yeah.
If I haven't checked into Facebook or Twitter in like 5 hours, right, what has happened in the world that I can't be a part of? And it seems your voice was uniquely suited. Your writing style, right, it's like, watching Talib Kweli.
Oh, stop.
Right, no, because, he the way that he writes as a rapper in these kind of, pithy-like phrases works for Twitter. For you, it's not so much the pithy part, right, but this kind of fragmentation that's like the way that you flow,
yeah.
right, works in a kind of Twitter world. Thinking about where you were in 2010 in relationship to Twitter and other social media, how do you feel about that now, particularly now that you got to sell a book?
It's difficult for me now because, again, in 2010, I was having very public manic episodes, very public. I was tweeting rapidly. Every thought that entered my mind. Twitter provided a space for that mania, that hypomania, to exist and not be absurd or ridiculous or abnormal. It was normal. People expected that. That's the way that it was set up. So these quick bursts of thought and every observation coming out was all part of that. And looking at that now, I see where that was a problem. But people wouldn't know that was a problem. And I'm telling you now that it was a problem. I have found that I've taken months off. When I was writing the book, I took 10 months off of Twitter. Just last week, I took 3 or 4 days off. I would never have thought that I could do that in 2010 because I didn't feel, I think, and a lot of people feel that now, I didn't think that I existed if there wasn't a tweet attached to it.
Right.
I didn't think like I felt like a real person or a whole person or a person who existed in the world unless I was on Twitter. But the thing about that, though, is that people will remember the observations and the quick wits and whatever, but the stuff about me drowning or dying or feeling, completely empty, no, that's not true. I was about to lie to y'all. No, that's not true. Because I also had very public, conversations about my mental health way before people were accepting of that, because it needed some place to go. And I think that the only place that I felt like a full person was when I was able to use what I did, which is words, to explain and express how I was, where I was, what I was doing to other people. So that became the draw of Twitter for me. And it just so happened that other people were entertained by it, which was odd to me, but then not too much because I'm also kind of a ham. So I was like, all right, give me the likes. Did they have likes in 2010? They didn't. Y'all are 12. It's never mind. It's fine. They used to not have likes. You used to have to like manually write down the person, not write down. Never mind.
Yeah, right.
But you remember.
And only 140 characters.
Only, and including the person's name.
Right.
It was a mess. It was a wild, wild west. We paved the way for y'all. Now y'all just retweet with, abandon.
How you feel about Instagram?
I like Instagram as an observer more, but not so much as a participant of it.
I got to tell you, there was like some early book launch event that you had. You were like wearing this dress, and it was like, oh damn.
Oh, like recently?
When the book first dropped.
Oh yeah, yes. That was a good dress. The thing is if I had a personal photographer, someone just to catch me in moments, I'd be all about Instagram. But I'm not like the selfie life is just, you gotta get angles and lighting. It's a lot of work. Filters are fantastic though. I use filters just in my personal life.
Okay. What are you listening to these days?
I have the worst taste in music. Like I have really great taste in music, but I also have really bad taste in music. So just now, this is good. I've been listening to Most Def or DJ Honda featuring Most Def, Traveling Man. Okay. That's what I listen to in the airport on repeat. That's what I used to listen to when I was doing deaf poetry. I'm a big Most Def Native Tongues fan. I'm definitely not listening to anything new. Okay. Nothing that came out within the last, I think the most recent thing that I'm listening to is Channel Orange, okay. Frank Ocean. But nothing that's come out. I don't know anything.
7 years old?
Yeah, music is terrible now. Let me just tell you, listen. I'm sorry. It's not good. I tried the trap thing. I tried to understand it. I tried to be there with it. My thing is, if you can't dance properly to it, I don't know why you're even listening to it. Like, you can't even nod your head, really. You know what I mean? So I don't get it. It's all very much, woo, whoa. Like, what is that? I don't get it. I'm a big fan of Lil Nas X as a person. The song, not so much. I'm 43 years old, so y'all don't look at me like that. This is very much on brand for my age group. Sorry about that. I'm sure what you listen to is great. What are y'all listening to? Tell me someone. Oh, she's dope. She's dope. I heard one song. She's dope. Who else? Okay. I like her. I like her, but I also like Erykah Badu. So there's a lot of the stuff that I like now that I can also like link to the people so I'll just listen to them. But I'm glad that y'all have her. Like I am. I'm really glad that she exists for y'all because I was really worried. There was a lot happening and I didn't know like who's gonna be on your radio stations when you're taking your kids to school. You know what I mean? Oh, you know what the worst thing is? I'm sorry, I took over. But
that's fine.
The worst thing is there's a radio station in DC, WHUR. Howard University Radio. Their tagline used to be "No rap ever" or some shit like that. Something more clever than that. And I remember that when I was in my dad would be driving me to I used to be on Teen Summit, so that was like our long drives. And we would listen to that and it'd be all the oldies. My dad loved Sam Cooke. I'm a huge Sam Cooke fan. It'd be all of that. The other day, I'm in the car taking my child to soccer practice, and I'm like, WHUR, you're a little Sam Cooke. They're playing Biggie. And I'm sitting here like, am I old? Is this the golden age of music now? Is that what we're doing? I don't like it.
That's what we're doing.
That's the end of my story. I don't like it.
One of the funniest things that I ever saw you tweet about was actually musical. When you talked about watching Marvin Gaye's sexual healing video for the first time, you're like, what the hell is this?
Marvin Gaye, here's another weird kid thing. I thought that Marvin Gaye sexual healing and Marvin Gaye Motown were two different people. I thought Little Michael Jackson and Thriller Michael Jackson were two different people. Like, very clear in my mind, these are two different people. So when I realized that this sexual healing person and this other person were the same, in my mind, I couldn't handle it. And then rewatching sexual healing, even the song. And then have you seen the live Grammy performance when he's like coked out of his mind and he can't even lip sync? And that's another thing. When I discovered that people were lip syncing, God, so much trauma as a child. It's not in the book though. I just went on a weird tangent. I apologize.
Thank you, Bassey.
Thank you. Thank you.